In the earliest dawn of human history, before the towers of Babylon rose against the sky, before the pyramids pierced the desert sun, there was Sumer. A land between rivers, where reeds bent in the wind and mud gave birth to cities. Here, the first words were pressed into clay. Here, kings claimed crowns, and temples grew taller than houses. Here, the very idea of civilization was born. But civilization is never only light. It is also shadow. Behind the brilliance of invention and the pride of empires, there lurked rituals and practices that blurred the line between devotion and cruelty, between worship and fear. To walk among the Sumerians was to live in a world where even the most private act of the body was made sacred, and yet terrifying. To the Sumerians, desire was not a quiet, hidden thing. Desire was law. Desire was order. Desire was the cord that tied earth to sky, mortal to immortal. The flesh was not only flesh. It was a doorway to the divine. Each act of union carried more than passion, it carried meaning, it carried weight, it carried the fate of the people. Inside the towering temples of Inanna, goddess of love and war, women served as vessels of holy desire. The walls of these temples echoed with songs and chants, but also with whispers and weeping. Some women walked through the gates believing they were chosen, marked by the goddess to serve. Many others had no choice. Daughters were offered, sometimes sold, sometimes forced, their bodies surrendered to the will of priests and kings. Within those walls, they were known not as wives or daughters, but as sacred prostitutes, living offerings to the goddess herself. To the worshipper who came in from the streets, to lie with such a woman was to touch the divine. It was to please Inanna. It was to give a sacrifice not of animal or grain, but of sweat and flesh. He would walk away believing he had blessed his home, his field, his children yet unborn. But for the woman, there was no walking away. Her body was not her own. Her life belonged to ritual. Again and again she was given to strangers, her own will dissolved beneath the name of devotion. What was praised as holy in the songs was often lived as captivity in the flesh. And then, there was the sacred marriage, the ritual at the heart of Sumer's power. Each year, the king himself was led into the temple. He was dressed in royal robes, crowned with a golden headdress. Before the eyes of priests, nobles, and commoners, he was joined with a high priestess chosen to embody Inanna. This was no private wedding. It was a public trial of the body. On that night, their union was more than man and woman, more than flesh against flesh, it was the joining of king and goddess, earth and heaven. The belief was clear, if the king satisfied the goddess through her vessel, the land would be blessed. Rivers would flood, fields would bear grain, herds would multiply, and the city would prosper. But if he failed, if the goddess turned away unsatisfied, famine and ruin would follow. Imagine the weight of a kingdom pressing down on one man's body. Imagine a king, ruler of thousands, trembling not before his enemies, but before a priestess who bore the face of a goddess. His power, his throne, even the survival of his people, bound to a single night of passion. Beyond the temples, the city streets also burned with rituals of desire. Festivals in honor of Inanna turned order into chaos. As drums thundered and torches blazed, men and women drank until their senses swam. They wore masks, they cast away names, they sought strangers, not lovers. To couple in the open streets, under the firelight, was believed to invite the blessing of fertility upon the land itself. For some, it was freedom. For others, it was frenzy. And in frenzy, shadows grew. Beneath the music and the laughter, there were whispers of coercion, of force, of bodies taken not for worship but for power, hidden beneath the veil of sacred celebration. In Sumer, sex was never simply pleasure. It was power. It was ritual. It was a weapon sharpened by kings and priests. Kings proved their right to rule not only with armies but with bodies. Priests held sway over cities by controlling temple rites. Women were bound, not only by law, but by the belief that their very flesh belonged to the gods. Men were tested, their worth measured not in words or battles, but in endurance, in passion, in their ability to prove themselves beneath the gaze of gods. The myths themselves carried the same truth. Inanna, the goddess of love, was also the goddess of war. Her passion was fierce, but her wrath was terrible. She raised up her lovers, only to destroy them when desire burned away. To be chosen by her was to walk a path of both ecstasy and ruin. Love was not soft. Love was not safe. Love was war, and desire was a battlefield where mortals often lost more than they gained. When the rituals ended, when the festivals were over, the people of Sumer returned to their homes. But the shadow of these practices never left them. Every act of devotion was laced with fear. Every embrace was a reminder of power. They lived in a world where desire was holy, yet terrifying. Where worship was mingled with suffering. Where love itself could be turned into chains. Today, the great ziggurats of Ur and Uruk lie silent. Their walls are broken, their towers crumble into dust. The songs of the temples are lost to time. Yet when you walk among the ruins, it feels as though whispers still linger. The stones remember. They remember the trembling of women behind temple walls. They remember the footsteps of kings, heavy with fear as they entered the sacred chamber. They remember the festivals, the firelight, the frenzy, the cries lost beneath the drums. Civilization was born here, in this land between rivers. But civilization was not born in light alone. It was also forged in shadows. The Sumerians gave the world writing, kingship, and cities. But they also gave us the idea that desire could be used as power, that flesh could be made into offering, that the most private act could be turned into the most dangerous weapon. And so, as the wind blows across the ruins, as the Tigris and Euphrates still flow in silence, the shadows remain. They remind us that the cradle of civilization was also a cradle of fear. For the Sumerians, sex was sacred, but it was also sacrifice. It was worship, but it was terror. And when desire became law, when devotion became demand, it became something darker. It became a chain. It became a weapon. It became a shadow that even now has not fully died.